Hello everybody. Clearly crime scene investigation and insects are very, very interesting to everybody. I was a crime scene investigator for 12 years, and at the time of my fellowship I was actually working at the National Forensic Centre up at Harbley Hall in Durham, and that's where the majority of crime scene investigators in the country are actually trained, and where I was trained as an individual. We do all of the sorts of things that you see on the television. Unfortunately, at this moment in time, we can't do them in 60 minutes with 3 commercial breaks, but we are working towards that. When I actually first started my training as a crime scene investigator, you were sent away for 9 weeks from your police force up into Durham, and you were taught how to take photographs, how to recover physical trace evidence, and how to fingerprint crime scenes. And then you were sent back to your police force, and that's where you actually learned how to do that in an operational context. The reason that I applied for my fellowship was because we were going to change that. We were going to change that model of training for crime scene investigators. We wanted to make sure that wherever you were in the country as a crime scene investigator, you operated to the same standards, you delivered the same service, because at that time it was fragmented. So depending on where you lived, you either got a particularly good service from a crime scene investigator or not a particularly good service. So it was my job as a subject matter expert to look at that training program. I travelled to Australia and to New Zealand. I travelled to America, and it was a bit of a difficult time in 2009 because in America, the NAS report had just come out being concerned about the state of forensics within the USA. We were going through austerity measures in the UK. They were looking at police force amalgamation, and the Forensic Science Service was in demise, and we were concerned that we were going to lose our major forensic service provider, and what would happen to all the research and the development that they were actually doing in this country in terms of taking forensics forward. I looked at what was going on overseas and saw that what they'd actually instigated in Australasia was a program whereby they had standards that all of their crime scene investigators worked to, and they had to demonstrate competency. And that's what I based the UK program on. So now in the UK you have a 2-year learning program for crime scene investigators. They come away for 4 weeks initially to learn how to examine volume crime scenes, go back into their police force for 6 months and develop competency within crime scenes, and then come back again for another 3 weeks to deal with more serious and major crime. And what I also built into that program was the ability for crime scene investigators to make mistakes within the crime scene. So for example, we had crime scenes involving bodies, and the bodies that we used are the sorts of ones that you saw on the last presentation, the ones that look particularly real. And we set up crime scenes for them, so it looked like it was a suicide or looked like it was a straightforward sudden death, but in fact it was actually a murder scene, and allowed them to actually make those mistakes within those crime scenes. Develop the intelligence, the forensic intelligence around crime scene investigation as well, something which wasn't too prevalent in the previous learning program. So all in all, what we had now was a 2-year program for all crime scene investigators, and at the end of that, they also were awarded a foundation degree in forensic science, which meant they could then go on and take a full degree if they wanted to as well. So here was a real first for this country to actually professionalise crime scene investigation. So I was quite proud of that one. That was the first one. And then what we found was, well, crime scene techniques haven't really changed very much, and I don't know if anybody's sadly been the victim of crime where a CSI comes and puts some forensic powders around the place and generally says to you it comes off with a bit of washing up liquid and disappears. It doesn't, by the way. And here we are moving into this digital age now where we need to think about how can we examine the crime scene a bit more effectively. So I moved to the Police Science and Forensics Unit, which sat underneath the National Police Chief Council, or ACPO as it was then. And I was actually instrumental in looking at what we call lifetime forensics. And there were 3 key areas there. It was looking at the crime scene, forensic police custody processes, and person identification. And what we actually did, we surveyed everybody who worked in this area within the UK, and they told us what all the challenges were in those particular areas, whether it was training, whether it was equipment, whether it was processes and practices, to make sure that everybody who was thinking of doing any research and development in this area knew A, what the priorities were, and B, if they worked on those priorities, then we would actually help them and put them in contact with police forces to make sure that research and development actually meant something at the end of the day. So I spent a lot of time visiting universities, talking to small and medium enterprises, talking to academics about the types of research that we were interested in. And that went particularly well. And I've got a research project that I'm looking at the moment, because some of the answers to forensics don't sit within the forensic arena, they sit somewhere else. So I'm working with some archaeologists who are doing 3D reconstruction of of artifacts from archaeological sites, and looking at whether or not we can use that 3D reconstruction scanning for very small elements that we find within crime scenes, for example, broken glass. There's lots moving on there. The Police Science and Forensics Unit was part of the National Police Improvements Agency, which disappeared, and I now sit within Home Office Centre for Applied Science and Technology. A bit of a change for them, because they're all pure scientists, so they've never had forensic people come in, and it was quite a battle. You know, forensics is a bit of a new science, and physics and chemistry are old sciences, if you like, potentially. But what we didn't appreciate, and what they didn't appreciate at the time, was forensics cuts across every single area within Home Office science, whether or not that's actually looking at security, whether or not it's looking at borders, whether or not it's looking at covert side of things that the Home Office Centre for Applied Science and Technology actually do. So it's very useful for them to actually have forensics well embedded within there. What I've also been doing while I've been sitting within the Home Office is working with Innovate UK and the Knowledge Transfer Networks, and setting up Forensic Science Special Interest Group. So all of those that are interested in forensic science in the UK can actually come together within this network, and we now have a Forensic Challenges database that sits in there. So it's free to join, go and have a little look, see the sorts of challenges we're looking at, and it may well be that somewhere within your industry you have the answer to what we're actually looking at now. What else have I been doing? My next challenge, everybody knows that a fellow can't sit still for too long. You know, we want our next particular challenge. So the one that I'm moving to now is actually moving to Innovate UK and actually looking at security side of things with Innovate UK. So I'll be over there for the next 12 months, actually looking at developing that particular area. Most of the crimes that we look at as well today have a digital element, whether or not that's computers, laptops, smart houses that have digital central heating systems, or fridges or smart kettles and things like that. So what we've actually recognised really is what we need to look at now, and what we need to focus on is digital forensics. So just recently I've been actually going around the UK and talking to crime scene investigators, talking to police investigators, talking to those that work in high-tech crime units and digital units about their particular challenges. So what I'm actually doing at the moment is putting all of those together and collating those, and then I'll be sending those out to industry and academia so they can actually start working on those challenges as well. When you think about other things that I've done as being a Churchill Fellow, we've had our first meeting of forensic fellows, and you were there as well, weren't you, at that one? So we've all got together and we sort of made each other known and what our interest areas are, and we're hoping that in the future we can actually do something between the forensic fellows on a personal note or professional note as well. I've also been the chair of the East Pennine Association of Churchill Fellows, to give something back there, a thriving region. So, you know, if you want to know anything about what we've done in terms of websites and Facebook, then please talk to us. I think on a personal note, a Churchill Fellowship gives you the confidence to talk to anyone, anywhere, and I never go anywhere without these anymore. I had a fascinating conversation on a train from Durham to London that was stopped because somebody had stolen all of the copper and the pipes from alongside the rail network. So we're talking about the forensic examination of that particular crime scene. But he worked for the prison service, and there are overlaps again within forensics and the prison service that we can start looking at. I've recommended 2 fellows who've also gone on to gain fellowships. And I was fortunate enough to be one of the few hundred that actually went to meet Her Majesty the Queen just recently in Buckingham Palace, as well as going to the RSA Engage event in London. So if anybody went to that one, something that their fellows said, he said, "Oh, you're all very confident, you Churchill fellows, aren't you? You know, you'll go up and talk to anybody," which is particularly true about us as well. What I also find is the words that with opportunity come responsibility. And that's included in your own personal life as well as a Churchill Fellow. You know, it gives you the confidence and courage to change things in your own personal life that you're not particularly happy about and make new starts. When you realise you can travel for weeks and weeks and weeks and everything that you have is packed into one small bag, you have the realisation that really you don't need very much to survive in this world, and all you need is the network of very good people who will help you and will talk to you. The value of kindness to others is something that I've also recognised as being a Churchill Fellow, and it's life-changing in all particular areas. So now when I look back and I watch television, as most of you do, and you look at the news and some of the horrors that you actually see in terms of crime investigation, I think we've had one just recently, haven't we, where a young man has actually killed his mother and his stepsister, I think. And we look at what goes on behind that. I know those individuals that go to those crime scenes now. And in fact, it's quite likely they've actually trained some of those individuals. And it's really important to remember that whilst it's no good being the victim of crime, what crime scene investigators in the UK do and are very, very good at doing is collecting all of the forensic evidence that can actually be passed to the Crown Prosecution Service in the UK to make sure that there aren't any gaps in that forensic evidence and they have the best evidence that goes forward to help the prosecution. One of the things that's of greatest concern is not necessarily the forensic processes like the entomology or like DNA or like fingerprints, but it's how that evidence gets from the crime scene into the court. And what we see more and more now is if there's a small gap in either paperwork or there's a small gap in transferring that evidence from one person to another, then it's likely that that evidence will not be used in court. So I'm kind of quite proud now that actually all of the CSIs within the UK all have a professional learning programme, are all trained to very good national occupational standards, and all have the ability to professionalise their career, and I'm part of that, so thank you very much.